Am I allowed to speak? Timothy McDougal, I'm from Somerset. As we spoke before, I haven't been here in a while. We spoke about the complaints that I filed against the 2 New Brunswick officers who planted drugs on me, and ultimately I got the case dismissed, yada, yada, yada. And you told me to go through the hearing process. So listen to what you said, and I'm going through the hearing process, and I'm here to show that, of course, it doesn't work. It isn't working. I presented my case to the hearing officer Hoffman, I believe like 2 months ago. Charlie Gagan was there, and I presented a pretty strong case. I presented 2 witness affidavits supporting my case of what happened that night. I provided Charlie Gagan and the hearing officer with copies of the notarized witness affidavits, and I've been waiting to get a response, whether I was going to get a recommendation for IA to reopen the investigation or what. And not too long ago, I got a letter stating that a bunch of garbage. Basically, I feel as though they, because I feel as though Charlie, all of them were working together to kind of prolong my decision. And he's kind of like throwing me through the hoops. In other words, he's asking me to, he's basically ordering me to provide a summary of what my witnesses will say before internal affairs interviews my witnesses, but he didn't order or he didn't recommend that internal affairs interview my witnesses. He just suggested it. He just made a simple suggestion. My thing is, I presented my case. I want to know whether or not I'm going to get a recommendation. He sends me back a letter, sending me a whole bunch of nonsense. Basically, I feel as though ducking the decision. It clearly states in the Attorney General guidelines that in the internal affairs investigation that all witnesses must be interviewed. I proved without a reasonable doubt that my 2 witnesses were never interviewed. But when I was interviewed by Internal Affairs from the beginning, I told Sergeant Shaw that I had 2 witnesses. He disregarded that. He never interviewed my witnesses. He never asked about them, no nothing. He just made his decision based on that. And of course, he exonerated the officers. So that clearly shows right there that, he violated, what he was basically supposed to do. There's Attorney General guidelines that clearly states that he's supposed to follow that procedure, but he didn't. So since I showed that to Hearing Officer Hoffman, he should give me a recommendation for Internal Affairs to reopen the investigation and do what they were supposed to do from the beginning. But now he's telling me that I should give him information. He's basically trying to do the job for them, and that's not his job. His job is to recommend Internal Affairs to open the investigation one way or another. And to me, it's like, they're throwing me through a bunch of hoops for no reason, And I've been...
Ms. Aaron, would you like to address that?
Yes, I would. Mr. McDougal's complaint goes back to, I believe, 2009. And at that time, I think his hearing was held sometime in the municipal court in 2011, at which time it was not dismissed.
Yes, it was.
Okay, Mr. McDougal, please let's maintain the conversation. Let Ms. Gagan answer because we were quiet listening to you, so let's keep the process. Thank you. If you disagree, say something after Ms. Gagan has done.
Okay, because she's giving a long, drawn-out story. I'm trying to, get
Mr. McDougal, she needs to, some of us, I know it's a long process, but this will help us to see. She's trying to give us a perspective of everything that is happening. So please allow her to finish her sentence and give, because now we won't be able, and we only have 5 minutes tonight to talk, so we want to use them wisely, right? So I would appreciate if you allow Ms. Gagan to finish this statement. Thank you.
So, as I was saying, at the time of the municipal court hearing, he appeared with counsel, Mr. Beach, who is the public defender, and he entered a plea. And a plea is just simply from the criminal charge, he pleaded to disorderly persons offense, and he paid a fine. And Judge Hoffman, at the time of the hearing, on May 15th, we listened to the recording of the proceedings for that night. At the time of the hearing, Mr. McDougal presented with 2 affidavits from 2 witnesses that he said that he had spoken with Officer Shaw about. I did not listen to the Internal Affairs interview because I am not the fact finder. Judge Hoffman is. So Judge Hoffman went back and listened to the interview with Officer Shaw and Mr. McDougal. And I think that was the right thing to do because Mr. McDougal said he had witnesses. Officer Shaw said he didn't remember that there were witnesses. So the judge did the right thing and went back and listened to the tape. On the tape, he did hear Mr. McDougal say that there were 2 witnesses. Judge Hoffman then sent me an interim report, which I received about 2 weeks ago. 2 days later, I forwarded that report by priority mail to Mr. McDougal. Tonight, I saw Mr. McDougal outside. I asked Mr. McDougal, did you receive my letter? He said, yes. I said, well, you understand that we only have a certain amount of time, 30 days, that the judge wanted to have that information back to us, the names of the witnesses and their address, so that the police could properly interview them. On the affidavits that he submitted at the time of the hearing, there was no address for those people. So in order for us to reach out to those people so that we can interview them, we need to know their information. We also need to know a proffer of what they are going to be testifying about. If they're just going to be testifying about anything that happened that has nothing to do with Mr. McDougal's complaint, then their testimony would not be relevant. But as the hearing officer, as the fact finder, he needs to know what they're going to be testifying about. And all of that is laid out in Judge Hoffman's report. Mr. McDougal has 30 days to get that information back to us so that the police officer can do their internal affairs interview. And we are waiting for that information from Mr. McDougal. So this process, the first process with Mr. Shabazz, took a long time, but this is his process. Now, we had the hearing May 15th. We got the report about 2 weeks ago. I sent it back to him, asking for information, so the process is moving along.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mr. McDougal, that I know that the process is, I think when I said the process is working because you're getting, even though it might not be what you expect at the moment, but the process is following up what you need to do. So what is your concern with this, getting this information to the hearing officer?
First I wanted to say, Charlie, you talk, we love to talk. But
address your question to me, please.
Okay, but my thing is, my internal affairs investigation has been completed, has been closed. Why? I mean, he's requesting information from our witnesses, but shouldn't internal affairs be doing that? I mean, what does he have? I thought his job was to basically find out whether I got a fair or improper, fair investigation. And if I didn't, then he should be giving me a recommendation for internal affairs to reopen the investigation so that I may get a fair investigation. He's requesting all this extra stuff, and for the information, I feel as though I already provided that. He's asking me for a summary. I gave you witness affidavits. These people wrote what they seen on a piece of paper, and they stamped in it. We got it notarized, and I gave that to
them. They have addresses, Mr. McDougal, the addresses that they will go back to. That's what he's
I don't need no address. My thing is, why is he telling me to? My thing is, if internal affairs, his job is to recommend internal affairs, to contact me to get the information, right? I mean, it seems like he's trying to dance around it. It seems like he's trying to do their job for them now. So, if they would have did that from the beginning, we wouldn't even be here.
Yes. Hold on.
You cannot cross-examine a piece of paper. You have to have a person there in order to ask questions.
He's not there to cross-examine. That's internal affairs job.
Mr. McDougal.
So,
Mr. McDougal, you have 1 minute. We stop in every. I'm sorry, Mr. We stop in the clock every time. There's Ms. Getting is not here, so you have more time. You only have 1 minute. Like I said, let's use it wisely and let's listen, because maybe there's something because my little thing that I don't know much about this, but is it that you want the internal affairs to call you to give, so the internal affairs could interview the witnesses? Because you said that they failed.
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
You stated that the witnesses, you have been provided the information, and then now Judge Hoffman is requesting the information so he could
so that internal affairs can,
That follow
the
the
Why is he
protocol
requesting
says.
it? Why is he requesting
Because
this?
he's the one listening to
I thought that was internal affairs job too.
So let's do something,
Can
let's
I
do
just
something,
finish?
sure.
One second. The protocol says that the police director will ensure that a thorough investigation takes place. They cannot do that unless internal affairs does their job and interview the witness.
My
That
case has to
ensures-
be reopened
Mr.
first though.
Batuga,
It's
Mr.
already
Batuga,
closed.
Mr. Batuga, let's listen.
The interview of the witnesses will ensure that a proper investigation takes place. And if you will recall, the protocol was for those people between 2003 and 2011 who believed that they did not get, number one, either did not get a fair investigation or were a little apprehensive about bringing their complaint, had not filed a complaint at all. Mr. McDougal had filed a complaint with Internal Affairs. They investigated it, but he was not, he fell in that category of people who were not sure that they got a thorough investigation. So that brings Judge Hoffman into it. He conducted an interview with Mr. McDougal. Mr. McDougal says, I have witnesses. Officer Shaw says, I don't think he did. He went back to listen to the tape and said, yes, there were indeed witnesses. Now it falls on Mr. McDougal to give us the information regarding the witnesses so that Internal Affairs can continue their investigation of those witnesses and his complaint. We can't do it otherwise.
So if Internal Affairs needs to continue their investigation, doesn't my case need to be reopened? I brought the paper, it shows, it clearly states that my charges, the case was closed and the officers were exonerated.
What date does that have?
It has July 29, 2013.
That was 2000, it has to be reopened.
It has to be reopened.
It is.
Thank you, that's all I want.
want.
Reopen my investigation
reopened.
so that I might provide the information to Internal Affairs. It's not reopened.
It is somewhere where you have let's regroup for a second here. Let's regroup.
I didn't get no recommendation from Officer Hoffman. You keep referring to the judge. He's not a judge, he's an officer. He's a retired judge.
Let's regroup. Let's go back and let's listen to what the let's go back and listen. Mr. Hamilton, you have something to say?
Seems like there's extra things being added along the way to deter me.
Let me finish. Hold on for
try
a
to-
second, please. Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Just
Hamilton.
wanted to say that the procedure was established, is that there would be a hearing officer appointed, he's been appointed. He's running that hearing. Ms. Gaden and Mr. McDougal have to follow what he says. If when we get all finished, somebody's not satisfied with what he did, they can take the next step. But right now, Judge Hoffman, as Ms. Gaden said, is doing what she should have done, found out that there were witnesses, trying to get them interviewed. It's the only way we can go.
And it is my understanding that once you, the case is reopened, once you came back because you were not satisfied, you were in that category of, am I correct in stating? Once you fell in that category of people who felt that they were not, cases were not investigated truly, once you open this new investigation with the protocol, actually the hearing, to review case, it's open. It's open.
No, that's not true.
So that's what we did the process to
May I say
open.
one thing?
What, in a few. Huh?
Can you
That's
ask
not
me
true.
what case he's talking about?
What case are you talking about?
What?
Yes, Mr. Matthew.
My Internal Affairs case, my place has been closed since
By
2013.
bringing forth your complaint to the hearing officer, it reopens the investigation. So I don't understand what you mean when you say
Well, we would do,
your case needs to be reopened. It is reopened. By bringing forth a complaint, it's reopened.
May I
You're gonna
interject?
Well, my thing is,
chance that Mr.
I thought the
Shabazz-
hearing
I just want to
officer,
interject one thing to this.
He's almost done because his minutes are done. He has only 30 seconds and then you could.
I thought the hearing officer's job was to give me a recommendation whether or not to reopen my investigation, my Internal Affairs investigation. My Internal Affairs investigation is not open, it has been closed for quite some time now, over a year. So what investigation are you talking about that's open? This is something totally different, separate. My Internal Affairs investigation has been closed.
That's right.
It's not open. And that's why I presented my case to the hearing officer so that he can give me a recommendation to Internal Affairs to reopen it. So
That
they
makes
can
no
properly
sense.
give me an
That
investigation
makes no
and
sense.
review my, why doesn't it?
It
Okay.
makes no sense.
Because it's not fair. And I wrote a letter for the council too that I got notarized. I'll leave it with you.
Just leave it there, and just, I think there's a misunderstanding, if your 5 minutes are up, but, I think that you need to talk to Ms. Gaten and maybe explain the process again.
I talked to Ms. Gaten the other week and she hung up on me.
So what we do is,
She
let
hung
me,
the phone up. We were having a little conversation back and forth. She hung
so
up on me. I don't think
we'll come
she
back to you,
was
we'll come back to you, Mr. Matulo. Thank you.
Before I end this, I brought a letter for the council for you to review, and I brought some letters
Give it to the
basically
executive
stating that my case was closed and you'll see.
Council
Thank you,
President,
just put it.
if he doesn't want to do it with Judge Hoffman,
It's not a
That's why-
judge.
if he didn't want to do
He's
it,
a hearing officer.
let Judge Hoffman.
He's not a
know.
judge, he's a
That's
hearing
what-
officer.
Listen,
Out of courtesy, I call him Judge Hoffman.
I just
Mr.
wanna,
McDougal doesn't want
He's
to
your
comply
judge,
with
he's
that.
not my judge.
listen.
call the president.
I don't wanna go back, because there's people here. Excuse me. Let's have a conversation. If we can, I don't wanna go back to the same thing. You 5 minutes out, thank you for your 5 minutes. Please leave the items there
Who should I leave it with?
to the clerk. Thank you. And if, at the end, I think that you need to, we need to talk, and so you could understand the process, because I think there's somewhere, there's a
I understand, I'm following.
But thank
I told-
you.
you told me
But we'll
to, I'm
talk,
following.
absolutely, but we'll talk, thank you. We'll talk.
Thank you.
Mr. Maduro.
Aaron El Shabazz, Somerset, New Jersey, and I'm going to continue with what Mr. McDougal was speaking of, because I think what's being misunderstood here is that we have the protocol. My husband went through the process that failed him terribly, and is now trying to fail Mr. McDougal, and we're frustrated. So number one, the protocol said that the hearing officer is to conduct a hearing and determine whether the complainant received a fair and proper investigation. He makes a recommendation to not an order, because he's not a judge, he's making a recommendation which Internal Affairs can deny, okay, and whether the case should be reinvestigated because the original investigation was not proper. Mr. McDougal proved he had 2 witnesses, according to Attorney General guidelines. You know all of this. They were never interviewed. All the hearing officer needed to do was, after he heard Mr. McDougal state that he did have 2 witnesses, is say, well, according to the Attorney General guidelines, there was not a proper investigation. I recommend that the New Brunswick Internal Affairs reopen it and conduct a proper investigation, and then Officer Hoffman is relieved of his appointed obligation by Mayor Cahill. Now, what Ms. Gaten is trying to have you believe is that Officer Hoffman needs this information to conduct an investigation into this new information, which is all irrelevant to his position. In my husband's decision, Officer Hoffman said he is not to conduct an independent investigation. So how does the rule now change for Mr. McDougal? And now he needs to know his witnesses. I'm not going to go into the whole scope, because I'm sure that my husband's going to also, I'm not going to waste my 5 minutes. I want to say that from the beginning, this process has not worked. It's not designed to work. We're tired of it. I would like to know, when we came here before and we presented our concerns, our frustrations, and we made recommendations to remove Ms. Gaten because she's biased, to remove Officer Hoffman because he was obviously incompetent, what did you guys do
Well, I know.
with that information?
At the time, with Mr. Shabazz, and I always been very vocal, I know there were some things that we could have done better in the process.
Okay.
Because I think, and I always say that it was the first experience that we have, but I think there was, that's why I still believe that Ms. Gaten is competent. I don't think she's biased. I know that it's something that I cannot change people's perception, but I'm just talking about me in that sense. I think that is maybe it's the explanation of the process, or maybe we're looking at too much. The process is simple. To me, it seems like it's a simple process, but somehow it's getting, I don't know why it's getting complicated in between. And that could be from our part, it could be from the part of those who are putting, I don't know. But what I do know is that the process that is the best process that we can have, and I believe that Ms. Getting is doing the best job that she can in doing this, and she has been doing it.
If I may, I respect your right to your opinion, and I disagree. But my question was, after we came here before and we expressed that the process did not work, what did the council do?
I know I told Mr. Maduga, I said, Mr. Maduga, because he was here too that day, the last time, and I said, let's do your process, do as everything you should, as you know, with Mr. Shabazz, there was a few things with him. I said, go through it, and let's see how it works.
Okay.
It seems to me that it's working, and if it's not working, I will look into it and see what is not working.
Well, and that's still not the answer to the question that I'm asking. Maybe I didn't
Go
articulate.
back and revisit the process.
When we came for my husband's result, and we expressed why we felt the hearing officer did not do his job properly, what did you do after that? How, did you look into it? Did you have a conversation about it? Or did it just end here when we left?
No. With me, I know that since I always said I've been vocal, I said I wanted to make sure that the process, you know, that we don't have the same hiccups, I call it, if you want to call it, that we have with Mr. Shabazz. And that the process with Mr. I even asked about Mr. Matuga, and then Mr. Matuga has not followed up, and then because he has some family challenges, some issues, and I said, follow up. So I know I have looked into it. I want to make sure that it works, that we do it. I am confident that Ms. Getting is doing the job that she was assigned to do.
But I don't understand how you can be confident in that when everybody disagrees with you and you're not the one going through the process. They are.
But that's what I wanted to go through. Mr. Matuga hasn't finished the process yet.
Mr. McDougal has actually, if the process was done properly, he would be done. Because the hearing officer was just to make a recommendation, forward it to the police department, and then they would either honor the recommendation or deny it. That's where we should be. He should have a decision that says, Mr. McDougal presented me information, Mr. McDougal proved that he had witnesses, the Attorney General guidelines state that those witnesses have to be interviewed. The Sergeant Shaw could not remember, so obviously they were never interviewed. Reopen the investigation. He's done. Now let Internal Affairs take care of it. It's simple. No, but now they want Mr. McDougal to give the information to the hearing officer who is irrelevant to investigating anything according to the protocol. No, the hearing officer is not to investigate anything. Internal Affairs is to interview those witnesses.
Okay,
Maybe there's a breakdown in communication here. Judge Hoffman is not doing an investigation. Mr. McDougal, we asked him to give us that information so that we can convey that information to the police, so that the police, Internal Affairs, could do the investigation.
Okay.
Not just,
excuse
me, I didn't speak while you were speaking. That's what has happened. We reopened the investigation so that the police officers can interview those witnesses. Judge Hoffman gave us the recommendation. He said, listen, I think these witnesses need to be interviewed. That's the proper thing to do. Because I listened to the tape, and he did say something about witnesses. So police officers interview these witnesses. So the investigation is reopened. So I don't understand, I really don't understand how after getting Judge Hoffman's report where he's asking the police to do the investigation of this claim and the witnesses, that Mr. McDougal and Ms. Shabazz can say that the investigation is being made by Judge Hoffman. That's not exactly.
And the witnesses, the Judge Hoffman, you only have names.
I only have names on an affidavit. And you can't do an investigation based on an affidavit. You
Internal Affairs can
discourse.
Yes.
Okay, then my next question would be, why is it relevant for Officer Hoffman to reserve his decision on whether the investigation should be reopened or not after hearing from the witnesses? The witnesses' statement, whatever it is, pertains to the incident that Tim McDougal complained about. It has nothing and no bearing whatsoever on whether or not Internal Affairs did their job properly.
Simple as that.
I don't understand that.
Can I try to reiterate it?
You have 2 minutes to do that.
If the hearing officer's decision as to whether or not Internal Affairs conducted an investigation cannot be made until after the witnesses are interviewed, how is that relevant to the investigation? What the witnesses have to testify to about that night in question when he encountered those 2 police officers is neither here nor there regarding whether or not Internal Affairs investigated it properly. They did not properly. It doesn't change anything. Internal Affairs did not properly investigate because they didn't talk to the witnesses. Now, the outcome of whether Mr. McDougal did something wrong that night that the witnesses can support it or not is irrelevant. That's my point. Internal Affairs did not do their job. That's it.
So
the guideline says interview witnesses. They did not do that. Therefore, they were negligent.
Okay, that's what you want us to say.
I don't want you to say anything. I want you to do what's right.
Yeah,
and now, if you want me to tell you what I want you to say, I want you to say that you're a bunch of incompetent, wicked people that will do anything to destroy the people. That's what I want you to say.
I just want to say that I understand the frustration, but let's keep it to a level of respect, please. We are not, I don't want to go into that, a standard discourse and a respectful discourse. I'm Mr. Shabazz.
Look, first point I want to address is I have Mr. McDougal's report, hearing report from Officer Hoffman, hearing Officer Hoffman. And he's an ex-judge. The same way an ex-wife loses her position as a wife and no longer has that status, she's now a single woman. He's an ex-judge, so he no longer has that status as a judge. He's just a regular civilian, now occupying the position of a hearing officer in a little informal hearing that y'all put together. So we need to clear that up where he's power tripping. Let's go on with this. In his report, he says, before I render my report, and if I'm talking loud, pardon me, but I have an ear infection, so it's actually hard for me to hear. Everything sounds muffled to me. So if I am talking loud, pardon me. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. Mr. Hoffman says, before I render my report on the fairness of the total IA investigation, it is suggested, a mere suggestion, that the New Brunswick Police Department Internal Affairs Unit interview these 2 witnesses. Mr. McDougal must cooperate and give the names of each witness together with their respective contact information. Furthermore, in advance of the interview by the IA unit, Mr. McDougal should give a short summary of what each witness will proffer. The purpose of this last requirement is to see whether the witnesses have relevant first-hand probative information. The aforesaid condition shall be completed by Mr. McDougal within 30 days of this receipt of this interim decision. Upon completion of the interviews, I would like to receive a copy of their statements or be able to listen to any recording to determine materiality. If the interviews spur further investigation, I will await the results before rendering a final report. Meaning before he renders a final decision. So he has not rendered the decision to reopen the investigation. Number one, if y'all really understood the process, which y'all do not, we understand the process. The council does not understand the process. And the lawyers are liars and they are manipulating you. So let's be clear on that. We can further go on and you will see that she's trying to convince you that the hearing officer is conducting an investigation. Yes, he is, with a limited scope, a very limited scope. He's supposed to investigate to determine whether Internal Affairs conducted a proper investigation. That's it. His investigation is limited to whether Internal Affairs conducted a proper investigation or not. Nothing else. He's not investigating or assisting Internal Affairs in investigating Mr. McDougal's allegations. In fact, I have my hearing report from Mr. Hoffman where he states, and if you want to see it, I'll give it to you. Scope of review. He tells you what the scope of the hearing officer's review is. And he says, the protocol, she always likes to quote the protocols, and she lies and manipulates, publicly lies. And y'all do nothing about it. I catch her in lies and tell you and prove to you she lies. I got videos of her lying. And y'all do nothing about it.
Exactly.
Mr. Hoffman says the protocol did not call for the hearing officer to conduct an independent investigation or act as a super internal affairs unit.
Exactly.
First line in the scope of review in his hearing report. Would you like to see it for yourself?
Please.
Yes, please let her see. Scope of review.
This is your case?
Yes. Yes, sir. And he clearly indicates what his scope is limited to. He's not an investigator dealing with internal affairs. He's only supposed to determine whether internal affairs did a proper investigation. The Attorney General guidelines specifically state that as part of a proper investigation, all witnesses must be interviewed. Must be. It's not officer's discretion. Sergeant Shaw has no discretion of whether he interviewed Mr. McDougal's witnesses once he told him he had 2 witnesses. He had to do it by law, or he's violating the law, which he did. It's clear. So I get tired of these crooked-ass lawyers lying and manipulating people who don't know the law. I know the law. They can't tell me nothing. I'm better than any of these fake lawyers over here.
Mr. Shabazz. Can I have a copy of this so I can have maybe so you so that's not this copy. That's your copy. Can I just say the paragraph? If I could get a copy of the paragraph. Mr. Shabazz, you have 22 seconds.
22 seconds, huh?
Yes, sir.
All right, no problem. No problem.
Tonight is like
No problem.
so many people that were doing just
After my hearing, because some of my 22 seconds were just wasted, so give me some extra time.
No, we stop. We stop right next
all
to
right. Council President Escobar and Councilman, when I had my hearing, it took years to go through the process. You told me when the process was over, you gave me your word that after I went through the whole process, if I was still dissatisfied with the results, the council will make serious review of the process, and since the council does have the power to make those changes, I requested that you make changes. You haven't made any changes. Now, Mr. McDougal has went through the process, and it has failed him also. That's 2 times in a row the process has failed. You hear the community liaison officer blatantly lie in public. What are you going to do about it? That's what I want to know. What's going to be done? Keep your word. I gave you respect because I thought you were a woman of your word. You either going to prove me right or wrong, because I've been told by other strong community activists that you're not a woman of your word, but I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I'm just telling you what I was told. But I gave you the benefit of the doubt, and I said, well, she seems pretty fair to me. So what I'm saying is, this is your opportunity to prove I was right or others were right.
I was, Mr. Shabazz, whether people believe that I'm a woman of my word or not, whoever, that's, that's their own opinion, everybody, and that's fine.
Well, I mean,
the facts will thank you. The facts will be proven now, right? I thank you because I always say that you have one person that I respect because of the way you behave in this.
And I respected you also, so, but I need to see.
And I did with you, you know that I was always open, and I said what I said, that I know there were some things that I did not agree of how things happen, the process. And you were there when I asked Mr. Badugo, please, let's see if we are going, the process is going to continue.
He's getting the same results from the council president.
This is what, so let us, you just came today. I think I still have some questions, but I'm going to talk to Mr. Badugo after the meeting in terms of the process. But if it doesn't work, obviously it's 2 cases, then we have to look at and review and see what is it that is not working.
Well, I just showed you part of what's not working.
That's what I want to have.
He's overstepping his bounds in order to cover up for the crooked cops.
I don't know if he's doing that, but
well, let me ask you this.
Everybody's in the same page.
Let me just ask you this. You do see the fact that he himself stated he's not to conduct an investigation. That's not what he's supposed to do. So that then proves that Ms. Gay was lying. No, correct?
What she was saying,
she said he is supposed to do that, and that they are conducting an investigation.
Trying to change the rules.
That's not what he's supposed to do.
But Ms. Gavin, what she was, I don't know if I heard correctly. No, we almost done. We almost, what she said it was that they need the information to give it to the Internal Affairs to conduct that investigation.
Now, that's my point. And it seems like my point is it keeps going over your
Well,
head. And
I hear you.
Let me just finish this point. It seems like my point is going over your head, and I know you to be an intelligent woman. So this can't go over your head. Just let me get this out, and you will understand it. If not, then you will let me down because you will be pretending to not understand it, because this is clear common sense. The hearing officer's job is only to review the case and determine, did Internal Affairs do a proper and fair investigation? That's it, right? Now, good. So stay focused on it. That's his role. That's his scope. Nothing else, right? So he doesn't get to cross-examine witnesses. She keeps saying he can't cross-examine the paper. It's not his job to cross-examine the witness. It's not his job to talk to the witnesses. He has nothing to say to the witnesses. Mr. McDougal's whole case is based on one principle. Let me finish. One principle and one principle alone. The Attorney General guidelines specifically state that as a part of a proper investigation, all witnesses must be interviewed. It's that simple. You can't get around it. Now, Sergeant Shaw did not review all witnesses, which she admitted after they listened to the tape. So, if he didn't interview his witnesses, he failed to do a proper investigation. Yet he closed the investigation and exonerated the officers. He has the document right here that says his investigation was closed and the officers are exonerated. The purpose of this hearing process is to try to get the investigation reopened, and you get it reopened not by him sending an interim decision. You get it reopened because he lets you have your hearing, he listens to all the evidence presented, and based on the facts and evidence, he makes his decision. Was it fair or was it not? Was it proper or was it not? Now, the fact that we all acknowledge that his witness just didn't get interviewed, and now they're trying to go back after the fact and interview the witnesses without giving them the formal recommendation. He hasn't given a formal recommendation. He's making him jump through hoops and making him. And look, he didn't even order Internal Affairs to review the witnesses, so we don't even know if they are going to interview the witnesses. He made a mere suggestion, but he's trying to get his man orders. And he's not a judge. He has no judicial authority to order him to do nothing.
Okay, Mr. Shabazz, I got the message.
Come on, you got to be honest here.
No, I got it.
He being railroaded.
Thank you, I got the information. I put it right here.
I just want to hear you admit that the Attorney General guidelines do say as part of a fair investigation or proper investigation, all witnesses must be interviewed, and they acknowledge that the witnesses weren't interviewed. So doesn't that mean a proper investigation didn't occur?
That would sound to me like it wasn't done properly.
Exactly. Thank you. Now, once we reach that determination, you see how easy you reach that? That's how easy the hearing officer should have reached it. So then the next step is only for him to say, you know what? They made a mistake. Sergeant Shaw said he didn't even remember him saying it. They made a mistake. You know what? I'm going to give you the recommendation. Internal Affairs, I recommend you reopen it and now interview his witnesses. Instead, they're trying to interview the witnesses without giving him his recommendation.
Thank you. I'm going to look into it. Anybody else that has not had a chance to talk?
At its worst, man. Corruption at its worst.
I can say that.